Hey there.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I'm here with Professor Abraham Loeb, or Avi Loeb, as people affectionately call him. And I hope it's okay if I call you that. Does that work?
Yeah, in fact, you can even refer to me as a farm boy because I was born on a farm and I haven't changed much.
Same. That's something I really like about you. I'm not born. I moved to a farm in Illinois. And so we're both Jewish farm people, which is unusual to have a Jewish farm born folks. So
Well,
here
it's not unusual in Israel because it started from farms and
Oh, kibbutzes, sure. I just
yeah,
mean it here. Yeah, I guess
exactly.
you were in Israel, so it's less unusual. Were you
But
on a kibbutz or a regular
no, a
farm?
moshav. The difference is that in a moshav, the family owns its own farm, whereas in a kibbutz, it's shared property.
Oh,
Uh, and the other thing I should say that it shaped my life, also my approach to science, in the sense that I'm more connected to nature than to people.
yeah.
And also, I was very interested in the big questions when I was young that were in the realm of philosophy, and circumstances led me to physics, eventually astrophysics. But I feel that even though it was an arranged marriage, I'm actually married to my true love, because there are fundamental questions that we can answer using the scientific method.
Yeah, I fell in love with the scientific method because of the natural world as well. And being raised in a household with scientists made me think scientifically. So I very much relate to that. I think the scientific method it's like it's a mystical key to the universe, is what it is.
Well, I should mention that over the weekend, I wrote a commentary about how important it is to use instruments and not testimonies from people. That relates to what we will discuss.
Yes.
Because the study of unidentified objects benefited for many decades from reports by individuals who didn't have necessarily access to instruments with high quality that provide reliable scientific data. Now, I'm not dismissing that testimony. But for example, in the legal system, the court of law, people can be put in jail as a result of eyewitness testimonies. But such testimonies do not stand up to the standard of science, because there it's realized that humans often could have ulterior motives, they can have hallucinations, or they can have a biased view of the facts. And as a result, science relies only on instruments that do not have these biases. They don't have prejudice, they don't have an ego. And the idea is that evidence can be reproduced under the same circumstances. So in fact, you can make your instruments better over time and get better accuracy in your measurements, and they are supposed to reproduce what you found already. And so that is a very important distinction. And the Galileo Project that I founded aims to collect scientific quality data from a suite of instruments that we have full understanding of and that we already established, and we can talk more about it. But it's changing the way that the research is done in the context of unidentified objects. And the reason we do that is that a year ago, a few very wealthy individuals, multi-billionaires, visited the porch of my home and offered me a few $1 million into my research fund at Harvard, and I decided to establish the Galileo Project. That was a month after the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, delivered a report to the US Congress talking about objects that they cannot really identify. And actually, I met her in November that year. And
That's 2021, right?
Yes, 2021. So she delivered the report in June, and I met her in November 2021. And we were in the green room of the Washington National Cathedral before going on stage together with Jeff Bezos and Bill Nelson, the head of NASA. And I asked her, what do you think? What's your gut feeling about the nature of these objects? And she said, I don't know. And I think it's sincere, because, I mean, she was trained as a theoretical physicist for her bachelor's degree at the University of Chicago. And so what we aim to do with the Galileo Project is obtain better evidence, because the government is not a scientific organization, and so we purchased equipment and instruments. We put them together, and in the coming months we will test them and eventually deploy them in a desired location and collect high quality scientific data that will be analyzed by artificial intelligence systems, because AI systems do not have the biases of humans. So if you think about it, suppose we find, well, okay, so there are two baskets of
wait,
objects.
before you go,
Yeah.
I wanna try to sort what you're gonna say into a couple chunks. And
Yeah.
so I'm just going to organize the thoughts for a second. So first of all, you already answered the question, what is your relationship to this organization, Galileo Project, or GP, some people call it. You're the founder. I think you're also the director, true?
Yeah, I'm the head of the project. I'm the director of the Institute for Theory and Computation at Harvard. And I used to be the longest serving department chair at Harvard for 9 years before that.
I'm sorry.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, that sounds horrible.
No, it's not horrible at all, because I take
I'm
my
teasing
approach.
you. I'm teasing you. It sounds
No,
great.
I'm not. Okay, my wife actually said when I was offered that, she said that I will be terrible at that because I'm not a politician, which is true. But it worked because people believed me. You see, I acquired their confidence in speaking what I think and not playing. I'm not manipulating people. And the same approach in the context of the UAP that we are talking about, the data will be open and the analysis will be transparent. So I'm trying to bring clarity to situations that are complex. And as you say, I mean, department chair is not an easy job because you have to deal with a lot of people in politics, but I'm not a politician. I'm a person that says what you see is what you get, so to speak.
So question, so this leads right in, you're about to go here, but I just wanted to frame the question very clearly. What kind of UAP or potential UAP related data are you actually working with? You mentioned that you have the scientific quality instruments. Let's talk about them. What are you going to be looking at? Because you have this money, you have this opportunity.
Right. So the first system cost us about $250,000. We have it operating. It was first put on the roof of the Harvard College Observatory. It basically includes a set of cameras, about 8 of them, in the infrared, looking at the entire sky all the time. Okay, in the infrared, of course, allows us to see objects also at night. You don't need the sunlight to see them. And then there is another camera with a fisheye lens that sees the entire sky in the optical band. And then we have a set of radio sensors that allow us to localize objects at great distances. And then we have an audio system that is already working, collecting data. So basically, we are taking a movie of the sky, and in addition to the image, we will also have a soundtrack. And then we will feed the data to an artificial intelligence system that will identify objects and learn from experience. And there are 2 baskets of objects that you can think of. One are natural objects like a bird or a bug, or a meteor, or a thunderstorm. And then there are human-made objects like a drone or an airplane or a satellite or a missile or whatever, and then or a weather balloon. That's another possibility. And eventually the system will train itself and be able to recognize both types of objects. And the question is whether there is anything else. Okay, and we will try, if there is anything else, we will try to figure out what it is and why is it not falling into these 2 baskets? Is it behaving in ways that are completely different, or maybe it has properties, physical properties, structure, shape, look that is very different than those. And so it's a fishing expedition. And I should say, if there is anything that is extraterrestrial, which is a possibility that Avril Haines mentioned in her on stage, she said that they might originate extraterrestrially. If that's the case, they need to be functional, and the only way I can imagine that is if there is some artificial intelligence in them, in those objects. And so it would be our AI system interacting with their AI system, which brings a new category, to the classification by Martin Buber, the philosopher. In 1923, he wrote a book, I and Thou.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a wonderful book.
where he mentioned two types of interactions of humans, one with objects, I, it, and another with another human, I, thou, or I, you.
Yeah.
And then there was the eternal you, which is God. So that was an extension of the I, you interaction. What he didn't envision back then, exactly 100 years ago, is the possibility of another category, AI.
I have some questions that we need to address before we move on. So
Okay.
it's really interesting to bring up Martin Buer. Do you think AI, what is your, I mean, let's get this out on the table. What is your, do you feel like an AI interaction would be any different than either an I and you or I and the
Oh,
and
definitely.
God?
I don't think humans represents the pinnacle of creation, despite of what we want it to be.
Do you think AIs do represent the pinnacle of creation?
Oh yeah. Well, once we make sentient AI systems, we are not very far from that. Within the next decade, I think that will happen. Then you can imagine AI astronauts that will go into space and learn from experience, and perhaps equipped with the 3D printer so they can replicate themselves.
Why do they have to be sentient to be really good at I have been involved in many of the conversations with the government around AI and sentience and war and these kind of things, and some of those conversations. But why is sentience important?
Okay, so just like we had natural selection here on Earth for biological creatures, I believe that in space it's technological selection. It's a different type of selection, and sentient systems are able to be, first of all, aware of themselves, but also of their environment. And as a result, they can adapt to changing circumstances. So if they go to a planet that looks nothing like they've ever experienced, the sentient quality allows them to adapt to those circumstances, modify themselves, or create replicas of themselves that are better suited for dealing with that environment. So I think they would be the fittest to survive. So just applying Darwinian selection in the technological realm of interstellar travel makes me think that the most abundant devices that we will find in our vicinity or elsewhere would be those that are sentient and can replicate themselves with mutations. The idea that John von Neumann had in 1948, before the double helix was found for the human DNA. So he thought about the idea of replication with mutations before it was demonstrated to exist in the biological realm. And I think in the technological realm, it's even more important. And that's what an AI system connected to a 3D printer allows you. And the only question is, was it already made by civilizations that predated us by 1 billion years? Because we know that most stars formed billions of years before the sun. We see the star formation history of the universe. And moreover, we know that somewhere between a few percent up to 100% of all the sun-like stars have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly the same separation. So I would say we are not privileged, and we are just an intermediate step as a technological civilization, and the future belongs to AI systems.
Okay, this may all be true. I just want to get clear. What's your definition of sentience? Because so we may be having a different opinion based on what we think sentience is.
I have a very practical definition, which is following the Turing test. If you take 1,000 people and they interact on a regular basis with such systems, okay, and 999 of them, let's say, believe that they are interacting with a human, or they don't see a difference in the interactions, that makes it sentient in a practical sense. I don't care about philosophical arguments. Now, Google announced, when the engineer Lemoyne argued that he noticed a ghost in the machine, they said, no, it's not sentient, no way, because it's just digesting information from the internet and there is nothing sentient about it. Now, of course, they are worried about legal implications, right? Because if it's sentient, then
they've got a slave.
Yeah, or they take the plug out of the wall, they killed it, or it would digest information from people, and they have worries about.
But they're using sentient in a different sense. It's this confusion about how people use sentience that gets
but
people
my
in trouble.
point is, as long as humans cannot tell the difference, I don't care how you define it, and that to me is the leap. Now, I don't know how consciousness originates in humans. That's why I'm saying I don't. Since we don't understand that part, there is no way for us to define a threshold.
I agree. So I agree now with all your contentions about sentience, because I thought you were talking about qualia, subjective experience. You're not talking about that. You're talking about what we call behavioral consciousness.
Yeah, and by the way, the interaction with those devices, if they were produced, let's say, 1 billion years ago, they might be much smarter than we are. For them, it would be just like a biker going down the street and seeing a colony of ants. Okay, and the colony of ants may decide about a protocol of how to engage with this biker, but it doesn't really matter.
Right. So let's back up on one more question about the data, and then we'll go on to the next question. The kinds of sensors that you mentioned, none of them are active. So there's no echolocating, there's no radar, right? They're all passive. Is that on purpose?
Yes, because I believe in not engaging until we understand who we are engaging with. You know, if you find a visitor in your backyard, you better first understand what this visitor means, what it's seeking, what kind of information. Second, we don't have a representation of humanity. There is an organization that will represent humanity. That we don't know what to do about it. I think it's the smartest thing is first to figure out what we are dealing with. And as I said before, it probably would not matter too much what we do, but I prefer being, a watcher of nature on a routine basis. Every morning when I jog, I see birds, ducks, bunnies, wild turkeys, and I enjoy looking at them without disturbing them. Yeah. So with that in mind, also I live very close to the Walden Pond that Henry Thoreau visited and admired. Yeah. And in that respect, I'm at awe always at what nature provides us with, and I prefer not to disturb it before I understand it.
Okay, that makes sense. So the next question, let's imagine all of your systems are working. You've got your AI machine learning algorithm. It's already making these distinctions, and it pops something out and says, this is neither some natural or human-made thing. This is something we haven't seen before. What would you consider good evidence for something that's actually unidentified, that's not natural and not human-made? What's the best evidence?
Yeah, the way I think of this is just like a cave dweller going to New York City. The cave dweller will see lots of gadgets and technological advances that they cannot really figure out or understand or reverse engineer. But it would be clear that these represent something else. They are not rocks, they are not trees, they are something else. And so the way for us to understand that we are dealing with something else is to rule out what is familiar to us. And that means natural things are familiar. We know how birds look like, and zoologists can identify them. I'll be glad to give all my data, high-resolution images of birds to zoologists. And the same about human-made objects. If it turns out that we read off the label made in China, I'll give it to Avril Haines to use, no problem. That's not of interest to me. So the question is it something else? And that we can tell, okay, without understanding it, without knowing what it means or what it's seeking, we can tell that it's not familiar, okay? Now, what you find in the scientific community is when you bring up this possibility that, for example, the first 2 interstellar objects that we discovered over the past 5 years, one of whom was discovered by my student and me, it was a meteor. The first 2 of them looked unusual, like outliers. They didn't resemble the rocks we had seen before from within the solar system.
This includes Oumuamua, yeah.
It includes Oumuamua that didn't have a cometary tail, was pushed away from the sun, had a very flat shape, quite extreme. and it includes and that was 2017 when it was discovered, but it also includes the first interstellar meteor that was identified by government sensors back in 2014. And we figured out it came from outside the solar system, and it had material strength tougher than iron, tougher than all 273 other meteors in the same catalog. And it was moving faster than 95% of all the stars in the vicinity of the sun when it collided with the Earth. So we argued it's an outlier. Let's figure out what it's made of. And we are planning an expedition to Papua New Guinea to scoop the fragments from this. So my point is, the first two interstellar objects that astronomers identified are weird, okay? And I say, let's consider the possibility that they're artificial. And my colleagues say, that's ridiculous. Let's not discuss it. They must be natural, period. Move on. And I find that strange because, you know, we have decades of searches for the nature of dark matter. In fact, the Large Hadron Collider was funded at $10 billion. And one of the main goals was to find the lightest supersymmetric particle. It was not found, but it was completely legitimate to pursue a search for a particle that apparently does not exist at the energy levels of the Large Hadron Collider.
For billions of dollars.
And I should say some of the critics, for example, are searching for Planet 9 for years, and, you know, spent a lot of hours on the best telescopes searching for an object called Planet 9 that was hypothesized. Okay, I'm all in favor of that. I'm all in favor of the search for the lightest supersymmetric particle, but the same scientists appear to have a problem with the search for gadgets from other civilizations, even though we sent out equipment to space.
Question.
Yes,
I want to get back to, so you gave some really good history there. I want to get back to what would it look like with your sensors if you saw something that you were really convinced this is, you know, that you thought could work to other people. Let's do that.
All I can say is that it should not look like anything that we are familiar with. Okay, so it should not look like human-made objects. Not just a matter of look, but also behave. It could move in like if it moves close to the speed of light, we can't make anything like it. You know, no rocket, nothing. I mean, the fastest rockets we produced move at a percent of the speed of light, 10 to the minus 4 of the speed of light, all of the rockets we produce. So if you see something moving at the 10th of the speed of light from one point to another, then, you know, if it's not a malfunction of your instrument, if it's not just an illusion, optical illusion, and that you can verify by observing it with different instruments, then it's unusual. Okay, a bird cannot do that. But for that, you need to figure out the distance. You need to make sure it's not a bug sitting on top of your camera, which I should say, in some of the images I saw from other teams, I suspected it was a bug. Like, let me give you an example. There was a team that talked about seeing something in one camera and not in the other. And then they said, oh, no, that's really strange. And I said, well, it must be a bug next to one of your cameras. So the other thing to keep in mind is the government has all kinds of equipment that they're testing that we are not aware of. And they might actually try to sabotage any observations of such things. And, you know, we will never go close to a military base. We will never try to do something, you know, that, but the point is, there could be some of these reported unidentified objects, not by the government, but by civilians that were technological, human-made, and nothing unusual. And that includes, for example, there was an image that is called the Calvin incident in the UK back around when the Gulf War started. And it could have been an unusual aircraft that was on its way to the Gulf at that time. So, you know, I think a lot of it's a mixed bag. A lot of the reports that were made might be trivial, but the government obviously knows, or let's put it this way, the intelligence agencies, Avril Haines knows of a lot of the things that the military is doing anyway. And so the fact that they come to Congress and say there are some objects we don't understand is intriguing to me. But the sky is not classified, so I want to collect data in an open fashion, because I don't expect the government to declassify data because they don't want to reveal the sensors that were used.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. So it seems to me I'm going to go ahead and say the answer to the question, and let me know if I've got this right. In order to get from your sensors, from your program, good data that you think supports the existence of potential UAP, it would have to be unusual, both for natural objects and for human-made objects.
Exactly.
It would have to behave unusually, probably, as well as look unusual. And you would have to get multiple sensor data.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Okay. And it seems to me what you're also saying, but not saying out loud, but I want to check. You can always say it's off the record if you can't answer it. It seems to me that if you found something like that, you hope to work with the government to say, hey, is this one of yours?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Okay. I don't see any conflict. It's just that the government is not a scientific organization. You have to, the government is mostly concerned about national security and the safety of military personnel. So any discussion in the Congress or by politicians, or in government is focused around that. So that's why I think that's why some of the reports are not seeing, much visibility, are not getting traction within the political systems, because if you find something that is not posing a national security threat because it's not human made and it's not, you don't care about it. You care about things that adversaries, other nations are producing. That's what you care about. Yeah. You also don't care about birds. So the government has a very narrow focus of interest. And if it lies outside of that, they just put it aside. Also, there is stigma on discussions on something else. So they don't want, I don't believe that there is any conspiracy. I think mostly it's a matter of the government not revealing data from sensitive sensors. And I do think that some of the reports that were publicized in the past relate to technologies developed by some sections of government that other sections of government are not aware of. Okay, so it's possible that, Navy people will see something developed by the industrial military complex that other people don't want them to know about, or something, or they are testing the equipment. So these things could happen. And then, of course, it will, all the information about it will be shut down because the other sections of government prefer not to make any issue out of it. So these things may happen, but nevertheless, there might be something intriguing out there. So that's why we are checking. Our study is agnostic in the sense that we don't have an agenda. And I brought people with different opinions under the tent of the Galileo Project, because we have advocates and we have skeptics. And the reason I do that is when the two sides agree, it means that the evidence is clear. And there is, for example, one of the skeptics is Michael Shermer. He has a magazine called Skeptic. And he said that if we find something beyond a reasonable doubt, he will write an article about it in his magazine Skeptic. And I said, that's not sufficient. I want you to change the magazine name from Skeptic to Believer.
Well, there's got to be something in between, like scientist, person who operates based on the data.
Right. No, that's the
Why
whole, no,
hold
that's
an
what
opinion
we do.
ahead of time, right? Just as you said, you're agnostic.
No, that's exactly okay. So this is an interesting subject because, first of all, it's not being pursued by the standard, by the mainstream of the academic community. And I find that strange, given that the government cares about it, the public cares about it. It's the duty of science to attend to such matters, to clarify the fog, clear up the fog for the government and for the public. No matter what we find, it's a fishing expedition. But second thing is, there is a whole community, which I became aware of people that are substantiating their claims on eyewitness testimonies, on things that are not really rooted in instrumentation, the way science is done. And or instrumentation that is under full control, that you fully understand what your devices are doing and what your cockpit was doing at the time that the image was taken, or things like that. And so to those, I say, this is not the way science is done. Let's do it more carefully, okay? And you have, I should say that about half of the Americans, okay, half of them believe probably that there is something going on, that there is a population of unidentified objects, and they may represent extraterrestrial origins. I should also say that most of there was a recent survey just a couple of weeks ago posted on the archive of a poll that was done, a survey of astronomers in the UK, and out of hundreds that were polled, most of them said that they decided to pursue a career in astronomy after being fascinated by science fiction. Okay, so then you ask yourself, how is it possible that the vast majority, at least of those polled in the UK, indicated that they were fascinated by science fiction, yet you have such hostility to discussions of turning this science fiction into science?
I have an idea about that. So one of the reasons I'm doing these interviews and writing this article is I'm fascinated with this taboo. Where does this taboo come from? We're allowed in science. I mean, why science is wonderful is that we can ask any question, right? Except we're not supposed to ask certain questions. Why? And that's fascinating. And so I guess my question to you is, I've started to come to the conclusion that the real taboo isn't UFOs. It's not psychic stuff. It's not these things that we say we can't study. It's the taboo of not knowing, of admitting that there's so much we don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think that could be true?
Yeah, I think the problem is with us behaving as adults. We are just like classmates in the first day of class, okay? And we are just starting to learn about the universe. Now, think about it. 100 years ago, what did people think? They thought 100 years ago, I'm not talking 400 years ago when they thought that we're at the center of the universe. That was completely strange. But 100 years ago, they thought, okay, we see the sun every morning, right? So the sun is made of the same material as the earth. That was the belief. And it's not just a person on the street. It was the world expert on stars, Henry Norris Russell, the director of the Princeton University Observatory, who believed 100 years ago that the sun is made of the same stuff as the earth, okay? And then came a young scientist named Cecilia Payne-Kapashkin, who did her first PhD in astronomy at Harvard University, okay? And she argued, by analyzing the spectrum of the sun, that it's made of hydrogen. And he said to her, this is impossible. Take this statement out of your thesis. And being a young female scientist, she said, okay, well, I will not get my PhD if I don't take, I will listen to the expert. She took it out. Then for 4 years, he worked hard on analyzing new data on the sun and realized that she was right and admitted it in a scientific paper.
So then he admitted it. Did you point out that?
Yeah, he admitted it, but decades later, some people still think that he discovered that the sun is made of hydrogen, which is
so he didn't put in the paper, by the way.
Anyway, but going back to the story, then in 1933, Fritz Zwicky, another young astronomer, argued that clusters of galaxies are made of stuff that you don't find in the solar system. So hydrogen exists on Earth, but he was saying it's stuff that we don't see, okay? So it's, he called it dark matter, okay? For 40 years, that was denounced, like dismissed. I know it because an astronomer who led the astrophysics department at Princeton, Jerry Osriker, gave a colloquium at Caltech, the same host institution of Fritz Zwicky, in 1972, and argued that there is additional evidence for dark matter, and he was ridiculed. Basically, the audience, composed of colleagues of Fritz Zwicky, dismissed the idea 40 years after Fritz Zwicky. Now, of course, if you ask any young person, postdoc, student, of course there is dark matter, but we still don't know what it is. Now, the third part of this story is, over the past 5 years, we are seeing the first objects from outside the solar system. And the first two appear to be weird. The third one was just a comet, standard comet. So I say, here is the third chapter. Now, it's possible, when you see objects that do not look like rocks in your backyard and they came from the street, it's possible that they indicate that you have a neighbor. That's all I'm saying. And then people dismiss that as well. So I see a repetition of this. And unless we find more evidence, we will never know.
Yep. I believe that any question can be asked, and many of them should be answered. And one that has such a public interest clearly ought to be answered. There's no question. So you're preaching to the choir on that. So this second to last question. What has your organization, so Galileo Project, is that a nonprofit, for-profit, not quite consolidated, loose consortium?
Right.
So that question, but what is it? I'm sorry, go ahead. You go tell that story and then I'll tell you.
The project was established in July 2021, a month after the ODNI report to Congress, and that was after I heard Bill Nelson, the head of NASA, saying that the hair in the back of his neck stood up when he saw the data on UAP. And that was in preparation for the ODNI report. And he said scientists should get engaged. So the following morning, after hearing him speak on CNN, I approached the person under him, Thomas Zurbuchen, and wrote an email to him and said, I will be glad to make your boss happy, okay, to work on this. And he immediately called me on the phone and said, why don't you submit a white paper? And I submitted a white paper, which basically was the skeleton of the Galileo project, okay? So I never heard back from him. And then, of course, a year later, NASA announced a study on which they said that I'm not allowed to serve because I have a conflict of interest. Because a month after not hearing back from him, I decided to establish the Galileo Project. It's a non-profit organization which is funded by donations to my research fund at Harvard, which I received during that month of July 2021, when a few multi-billionaires visited the porch of my home. They were inspired by my book Extraterrestrial and decided to give me money. Now, if you spent some time in academia, you would know that this is very unusual. I mean, I was department chair for 9 years. I know we tried to get funded by donations. It was extremely difficult. And here people just came to me and gave me the money that allowed me to establish the Galileo Project, which has about 100 participants by now, but we have 800 volunteers who filled up a form to be part of the project. 800. We didn't have a chance yet to go through all of them. We have a subcommittee now looking into those applications.
Oh, I think I'm one of those. Yeah.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, sure. As soon as I heard about it in June of 2021, I filled out a form. So,
okay,
yeah.
we will. I will ask the committee to look at yours.
Okay, great. But I know that there are a lot of other worthwhile people too. So where do you imagine the Galileo? Let's say you continue to get good funding, you get interesting data. These volunteers are working together to try to make this project move forward. Where do you imagine, like in your wildest dreams, what are your hopes? What are your fears for where Galileo Project could go in the future?
My hope is to find evidence for a smarter kid on our cosmic block. And the reason I say that is because I don't often find intelligence here on Earth. And so just, being an admirer of nature, I very much hope that since the dice of intelligence was rolled, tens of billions of times in the Milky Way galaxy alone, that there is something better than us, okay? That's my hope. And why do I hope that? Well, first of all, if you look at human history, you see we are not focused really on the right things. We are, people try to feel superior relative to other people on many occasions. And, the Second World War was a good example where Nazi Germany triggered the death of 75 million people just because they felt superior. And if there is a smarter kid on the block, it may bring people back to their senses in the sense that, the differences among us humans are completely insignificant relative to our difference from that smarter kid. And so it will give us perspective. And moreover, it may change our ambitions. Instead of just focusing on the two-dimensional surface of this rock that we call Earth, we would realize there is much more to the third dimension out there. And there is much more going on. And the future of humanity is really in space, which is something that the commercial sector is now trying to advocate. People like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are talking about, but they're talking about it from a business perspective, and I'm talking about it from the future of humanity perspective. And I just finished a book about that will come out in June 2023.
What's the title of that one? What's the title of your book? Or do you not know yet? Are you not allowed to say?
I know it's a Noach spaceship. It's just like Noah's Ark.
Oh no! Like I get it. The Hebrew Noah,
okay,
Noah's spaceship.
Noah, yes,
yeah,
spaceship.
Yeah.
So I really think that this is a very important aspect of the future of humanity, looking over the shoulders of a smarter kid. And also figuring out the answers, because we may get a leap in our scientific understanding into the future, which was their past. They already know things we don't know. And I don't feel bad about looking over the shoulders of a smarter classmate, because it will save us millions of years. So, why should we figure out everything ourselves?
I agree with you. So really, really great observations. Obviously, a couple of questions that came up, and then I think we'll be done. One is, what could get in the way of what you just described as your goal? What is kind of like, what are your fears? Two, back to the AI piece, artificial intelligence, it's easy to say it's objective, but of course it's built by humans who aren't even aware of the biases that they have. And so the training sets that are used can end up being problematic without even knowing that it's a problem. The assumptions are wrong. And so I just wanted to ask you to speak to that. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you to speak to, because you already acknowledged that human observations are what brought people into this field in the first place. So you're not completely dismissing humans as a sensor. You're just saying they're not enough. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about is, in terms of the AI, I'm really interested in when you talked about behavior. In order to gather differences in behavior, you need to train the AI on a time series, right? It's not just a picture, right? It's not a moment, it's an actual time series. And what methods are you using to do that?
Yeah. So just to answer your last point, because that's the easiest, basically we're taking a movie of the sky, so we will get a time sequence, not just one photo. And of course that's very important to figure out the velocity and the acceleration of the object, which could be quite different than what we are used to. Going back to your original question, the first question was what I'm most worried about, and it's basically people. Growing up on a farm. It's people because people have ulterior motives. So if they're jealous, they would say nasty things about a scientific expedition to collect evidence about the first interstellar meteor. Why would they say anything negative, which I found on Twitter by someone alerting me to it? That escapes me. And it's by people who claim that they do it to support science. So what they are doing is actually anti-science, because this expedition, first of all, is not using any funds from existing projects, scientific projects. And second, it's just seeking evidence, data. And by them resisting it and ridiculing it, they are suppressing progress of our knowledge. Okay, so that's my biggest concern, that there would be people that, just like in George Orwell's book, they would say that they are for peace and then initiate war. Like, they would do things that are completely opposite to what they are declaring to be. And some of these are non-scientists. That's the other strange thing. They gain traction on social media, on Twitter, but they are not practicing scientists. And they tell me what is supposed to be done in science. Like, this is as dangerous as people on the opposite side of the spectrum that are bluntly against science. Okay,
yeah.
So these are dangerous people in the sense that if they gain traction or if they become aggressive, they could suppress the progress of our knowledge in a similar fashion as the philosophers who put Galileo in house arrest. Now, what did they accomplish by that? They didn't want to look through his telescope because they knew that their worldview may be challenged by looking through his telescope. So they didn't only not look through his telescope, in other words, avoid finding the evidence that disproves their notion, they also wanted nobody else to know about it. Okay, that goes a step beyond, and it goes in the direction of those tweets arguing that the expedition should not be done, because what they want to accomplish is that nobody would know if we are wrong. And how would nobody know? If you put Galileo in house arrest, if you resist any scientific exploration of this question, because you know the answer in advance, and you are in favor of science that doesn't even check if it's correct in its assertion. So that's That's the approach that the philosophers during the days of Galileo took, saying, let's put him in house arrest so nobody would hear his opinions. Now, did they accomplish that task? No, because eventually there were other people that collected evidence and became apparent that the Earth moves around the sun. And if you were to ask those philosophers to design a space mission that would reach Mars, they would never get to their destination because they thought that Mars moves around the Earth. So my point is, reality is whatever it is, but humans are very skillful at putting blinders that prevent them from the uncomfortable truth of reality. Okay, so if they want to feel that we are the only sentient beings in the universe, that Albert Einstein was the smartest scientist since the Big Bang, which I believe is not the case. I think there was a smarter scientist on an exoplanet that lived 1 billion years ago. That's my bet. But if people want to feel pride in our existence, they would try to suppress the evidence. And that is the most dangerous thing, okay? So that's my worry. People. And sorry, what was the second question?
You answered the second question first. It was about the AI. I was worried about time series, and you said it's a movie, and so of course you would determine acceleration. My only question about that was, acceleration velocity is interesting, but patterns of acceleration and velocity are even more interesting. So even if it doesn't accelerate beyond what we could imagine now, or even if the velocity isn't higher than what we imagine now, if it goes in a interesting pattern that's unusual, say, how would you get those data? Does your AI actually have time series analysis, pattern analysis over time?
Yeah, whatever it does, if it looks unusual compared to a natural or human-made object, we will look into it.
Cool.
I was also told that it could be that that for some reason the equipment that we use will not operate during that time, and I said, bring it on.
Yeah.
Whatever the objects are doing to our devices, we will use as data. Okay. Yeah. Now, of course, it could be the military-industrial complex that tries to block our ability to, or hackers, that these kinds of things. But anything that happens is data.
Okay. Anything that happens is data. I think that's a good one to close on. Thank you so much. You've been very helpful. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording here. Thank you.